all. Welcome to today's webinar on developing productive study blocks. I'm Betsy Malarczyk. I'm a learning skills specialist with the Academic Resource Center. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat throughout the session. What we're going to be covering today are scheduling study blocks, setting study goals, and staying focused. So we'll start by talking about some of the things that you should consider when planning a study block, and then we'll move into some examples of how to execute those goals. So what are the primary things that you need to consider when scheduling a study block? You need to figure out where you're going to be studying, when you're going to be studying, and for how long you're going to be studying. And while this may seem like a simple, obvious factor for any study session, a lot of students approach their entire day as a period during which they need to complete work. And the goal is to work all the time and to do as much as possible. So the goal with creating a structured study block is that you're predetermining beforehand not only what the physical space will look like that you're studying, where you're studying, but also the content that you'll be studying during that block. We're going to start by talking about where should you study. A few questions to consider are whether you have the capability to study well at home, whether on campus is a better location for you to study, or if there's a different location. Can you study in a classroom building, at a coffee shop? Can you study with a friend at their apartment? But think about where you're the most likely to be the most productive. Related to that is the idea of considering whether you should be studying at one location or at several different locations. A helpful determinant in figuring out whether you should be moving from location to location when studying is how long you can sustain focus for. Are you the kind of student who can go to the library and sit for 6 hours and feel extremely productive? If so, then that's the best route for you. But if you find that you naturally tend to move on to a different location after an hour or two, it's better to pre-plan that move. When moving away from the library, for example, isn't pre-planned, and it's impulsive, then sometimes the flow of homework is also lost. So if you're at the library, your plan is to work all day and then you're tired after an hour and a half, which makes a lot of sense. If you then move back to your apartment or to your room and what you hadn't planned to do, you also are more likely to start doing an activity that you didn't plan to do. So if this is a habit that you see reflected in your own work style again and again, then it's better to anticipate that and to plan that movement from one location to a next. It's also best to be smart about with whom you're studying, because some of us study better with people and some of us don't. Some of us, when we're alone, we're more likely to procrastinate. So think about your network. Do you find that you often get distracted when you're alone in your room for long periods of time? If so, who can you reach out to, whether that be classmates or friends, to meet up for a study session? Or if the alternate happens, if you find that you're often meeting up with friends and then getting distracted and nothing's happening, how can you draw a firm line between your workspace and your friend hangout? And then the final question with where you should study is just the physicality of where you're going to be sitting. Are you going to be sitting at a desk, in a chair, or somewhere else? That somewhere else is mysterious because often folks try to study in bed, especially in college, and then somehow study sessions turn into a nap. And so if that's a trend you've seen happen before, then how can you avoid that by placing yourself in a comfortable study spot? It's worth asking yourself, where can you be comfortable studying for a long period of time so that you won't move because you're uncomfortable without being so comfortable that you're going to fall asleep or drift off? So the next question is, when should you study? And this is a question with no universal answer. It's completely dependent on your work style and your work preferences, especially when it comes to morning, afternoon, or evening. Consider when you have in the past been the most focused and when in the past you have been the most distracted, and try to anticipate the trends in terms of when you focus best. So if you focus in the morning, how can you plan study blocks for those times? This can be difficult for a lot of us. I study best in the morning and often had 8:30 classes, which meant sometimes I was waking up at 5 a.m. to do work, which was painful, but ultimately I decided that was the most productive for me. In part, that was because I knew that I was most likely to procrastinate if I worked in the evening. So if I could have that well-planned morning session, it was easier to walk away in the evening when I was not using my time well. It's also worth considering whether you should study before or after class or before or after other commitments. I think using class as a motivation as much as possible can be really helpful, because sometimes when you're in class and you're discussing the content, you feel motivated to continue on that vein of thinking. So if you're ever able to do a course's homework right after the class session, if you can plan to make time to do that, then you may be more motivated to do it. Likewise, if you have other commitments such as a club meeting, or maybe you're going to the gym and you know that you prefer to work outside of your apartment or outside of your room, maybe you can have the set books that you need to work on the specific tasks that you would like to work on. And another piece to consider is whether your homework block should be linked to a specific daily routine. This is the idea that you have a routine that you do every day, like go to the gym, and then add on to that another routine of doing a specific homework assignment. This is called habit stacking. It's the idea that having one automatic habit triggers another automatic habit. For example, when you wake up in the morning, you brush your teeth. Likewise, can you develop a habit over time of going to Spanish class and then doing your Spanish homework, or going to the gym and then going to the library? How can you develop a habit based on the habits that you already have in place? And then the third question we're considering is, how long should you study? And this is another factor that's going to vary based on personal working style. The main question is, should you sit for one long study block or several shorter study blocks? So often students wait for the long, empty Sunday when they have nothing to do and have 8 hours to sit down and work. And yet, despite having so much time, those students often still manage to procrastinate most of the day away. That's because for some of us, having that big, long block of time is difficult to focus during. So it makes sense to split a big block like that into several smaller study blocks. That's not true for every student. Some students find that when they try to jump from one study block to another study block, that they lose focus. And once they've lost that flow, it's hard to get back into it. So that's when they become unproductive. So it's important to think about what kind of system works better for you. And then the other question is whether you should focus on one subject at a time or several subjects. And this is related in that it relates to focus. Sometimes if you have trouble focusing or getting interested in a subject, it may make sense to jump between different assignments so that you're constantly working and not getting procrastinated. But for other folks, once they get into a certain flow, ruining that flow can be destructive to overall productivity. So it's important to make that decision before you sit down to study how you're going to approach it. So with all of those factors, I've been saying that the decision to be made is personal. And that's because the best thing you can do in planning your study block is to look at past study blocks that you've had and use your past habits to help you develop better habits. So think about a past study block that felt successful and think about what worked to help make it a success. Was it because of the time of day? Was it because of where you were studying? Was it because of how you were approaching the subject in terms of being in a state of deep focus or just jumping in and out? Likewise, you should also consider an unsuccessful study block that you had recently and ask yourself what went wrong. What was it about that study block that went astray from what your plans had been? And analyzing both of those experiences is going to help you determine the where and the when and how long you should be studying. So I'm going to break down for you my sample study block based on my personal study habits. And I'm going to talk through how I've planned these study blocks for Sunday, March 20th. So I wanted to use a Sunday because, as I mentioned before, I think that those are often the sneakily unproductive days. They seem like an opportunity to get a lot of work done, but somehow you manage to get distracted and then nothing gets done. So thinking about how I would structure a Sunday when I have nothing else going on, I've broken this into 3 separate study blocks. The first one is from 10 a.m. until noon, and it's taking place in the library. So I've decided to make each of my study blocks 2 hours long because 2 hours is about when I start to get antsy and when I start to lose focus. So I know that if I try to stay for much longer than that, I'm more likely to be more likely to procrastinate. And so I want to anticipate that time of day when I begin to feel antsy and build it into my schedule. So I essentially have a 2-hour work block and then an hour break during which I will go get lunch. I mentioned before that I like working in the morning. So for me, being at the library at 10 a.m. is essentially the first thing that I'm going to be doing that day while also taking care of myself. It is Sunday. I am going to let myself sleep. I am going to eat breakfast and drink some coffee, but pretty much I'm going to get up, get dressed, drink food, go to the library. And that's how I'm starting my day. And I know that if I can do that first, that will help me develop the flow for a productive Sunday if I can start working right away. And then I've also decided to start my first study block at the library because I know that in order to get motivated and to start working, I need that separation between me and my cozy room where I've just had a lovely, long sleep, a long slumber. And I know I need to be in a productive workspace in order to make the work happen. So I have 1 2-hour block in the library. I know that after 2 hours, I'm going to be bummed out by having been indoors for so long, especially now that it's spring and cherry blossom season, and I will want to see the world. So I am then going to take an hour-long break. I will most likely get lunch during this time. If it's beautiful out, I'll probably go for a walk. What I will not do is I will not return to my room or my apartment, because I know that once I do, that I will lose all productivity. Potentially, I will take a nap. Potentially, I will take a little break that will turn into a big break. Either way, I know it's trouble, so I'm going to stay away from my room for now. Instead, I'm going to move to the ICC, which is another working spot where I feel comfortable that I can get a place, but I will also have a new environment, a different environment from the library. I might also consider a coffee shop or even a different library on campus. But I know that I still need to work out in the world, but I want to move locations just to keep my interest going. And then I have the same structure of 2 hours before a break, because again, that's when I will naturally be procrastinating. So I want to anticipate that. I want to anticipate when my ability to focus will fail me, and then plan to structure a break. So for this hour, I probably won't have dinner quite yet unless I'm hungry or I didn't eat beforehand. During this break, I might go for a walk. I'll probably have brought a snack with me that I might eat. I may, again, go for a walk. Something that feels like a break, though. If I had a book that I was reading for fun, I might sit and read that for a while. But this is when I am returning to my room for my final study break. And what I don't want to do is go back to my room early and take that break in my room, because even when I get back to my room, I want to maintain that mental state of being in the work zone. So it's important, even returning to that space, to not treat it as a relaxation space yet. For me, I know that I start to procrastinate really aggressively in the evening, which is why once I finish that 6 p.m. final study block, I know I'll be done. Once my focus wanders, it's gone. So my goal is to get as much work as I can before dinner time, which for me will be around 6 p.m. And then once I go to dinner, that will be kind of my clean break from work for the day. But it's important to not engage in that break-like behavior in my room, because it's not yet break time. And starting those behaviors naturally will, I know for me as a worker, keep me from being productive from that 4 to 6 break time. If I do take a break, like read, or even if I were to play a game on my phone, I would rather do that in the ICC at the end of that middle work session than to do it in my bedroom for the beginning of the next work session. It's okay to kind of have a break after you're done with a workspace, but you don't want to go set the tone in a new workspace. So now that I've scheduled my several study blocks for this Sunday, I'm going to work to set study goals for each of those study blocks. Basically, setting a study goal, the idea is that you're taking this big assignment list that you have and breaking it down into as many small tasks as possible so that your large tasks become more manageable. So we're going to go through 4 steps for setting study goals. Assessing deadlines, breaking larger assignments into smaller manageable tasks, prioritizing tasks, and predicting how long each task will take, again, based on past experience. So we're going to start by assessing deadlines. And so for this, I've provided a few potential assignments that I might be working on this Sunday. So for the next day, Monday, I have a blog post due and I have a reading due. So those are both normal homework assignments that I want to work on Sunday. I'm also looking ahead, and I know that I have a math test on Thursday, and we're planning Sunday. So I have a math test at the end of the week, and then I also have a theology paper due Friday. So those are two major tasks that I know I want to at least get started on Sunday when I have 6 hours of working time. So that leads us into our next step, which is breaking larger assignments into smaller tasks. And this is where, again, we're taking these big tasks and breaking them down into as many small steps as possible. That's because something like a theology paper is a large task, and you can't just throw it on a calendar and say, write this theology paper, unless it's very short. An assignment like that has lots of smaller steps. And if it's something that's going to take me multiple days, it's going to be easier for me to plan to work on it if I can plan to work on mini step 1, mini step 2, instead of just any ambiguous task. So for this blog post, I've broken it down into smaller steps for the purpose of this assignment. It's not a large blog post. It's pretty short. It won't take me too long, but it still has multiple steps. I need to brainstorm ideas. I need to outline what I want to say. I need to type my draft, edit my draft, and post it. So not more than a few hundred words, but it still is helpful for me to plan out my day if I break it down into these little steps. The government reading that I have is an 18-page article. So even knowing how many pages an article is can help me plan how to approach it. Especially if there's a longer article, you can look to see if it is split into different sections, which this article is. It's broken into 4 to 5 page sections for the most part. If an article or a reading isn't naturally divided up by headings, then you can ask yourself, how can I approach this in a way that will make it more manageable? So if you had an 18-page article, you could consider reading it in 3-page increments if it's a subject that you find difficult to focus on. If it's 18 pages of something that you find really easy to read, then reading it all at once might just be its own unit. For the math test, this is an assignment that has a lot of different tasks I want to work on throughout the week. So I know that the first thing I want to do is look over my course notes for the last month. I want to rewatch 5 lectures. I want to write a cheat sheet for me to bring into my test that has different formulas on it. And then I also need to complete a practice test. And I'm sitting down and figuring out these tasks on Sunday for a test on Thursday because I know this is more than I can do in one sitting. And then for the theology paper, I need to read my essay prompt. I want to brainstorm ideas. I need to look for quotes. Then eventually I'll outline my essay, draft my essay, edit my essay, and then submit it. So again, I'm not going to do this all in one setting, but it's important for me to see how I can break it down into smaller steps. After that, I prioritize the tasks that I will focus on today, this one study day Sunday. So for today, I'm going to complete my blog post. I'm going to read my article. I'm going to look over my math course notes, which is just the first part of my study plan. I'm going to read my essay prompt, brainstorm, and then look for quotes for my essay, which is, again, just the first step. So while I didn't need to know all of those steps for math and for the theology paper to plan out this entire day, knowing what I needed to do throughout the week helped me figure out a starting point for today. So then you will predict how long each task will take based on prior experience. So again, this is a guess. You don't know how long every single task will take you, but you have read articles before, you have written before, you have studied before, especially at this point in the semester. So look back on your prior experience to see how you would estimate how long each task will take you. So for this particular study block, I would guess that the blog post would take me an hour total. The government article would take me an hour to read. That looking over my math notes would take me 2 hours. That brainstorming for my essay would take me an hour. And that looking for quotes would take me an hour. So we have 6 hours of work for today, which works with my study blocks. So then what we have here is my final study schedule based on that assessment. So for my first 2 hours in the library, I'm going to complete my sociology post and work on my government article. I want to start with those two because those are the two that I feel are the most predictable in terms of how long it will take me to complete them. I know that math studying and theology brainstorming can turn into something longer than I intend to, but I feel good about being able to sit down, complete these tasks, and then they're done. And then I also feel like reading the government article in particular is something that I'll do better when my energy is higher, which is the case for me in this particular instance. Then after that, during my second study block in the ICC, I'm going to look over my math notes. I think that studying for math is something that'll go better in an environment where there are other people because it's easy for me to space out while studying. So being in a place like the ICC will help me focus on these notes. And then finally, I'm doing the essay brainstorming and looking for quotes during the final study block. And in part, I chose to place this during my final study block because this is when my energy is lowest and this is the setting where I have the hardest time focusing. And this is the task that for me, I would be the most engaged in because it's low pressure for me to just brainstorm and look for quotes. Other students may feel differently about that. Other students might say, no, give me that government article, that's the easiest. But the point is that I've taken what I think is the easiest task to complete on this day and scheduled it for the environment where I think I'll be the least productive so that I'm less likely to procrastinate or wander off. So we've been taking we've already taken a big day and a big collection of tasks and broken them into smaller study blocks. Now we're going to structure one of these study blocks even more minutely. Again, the whole idea of structuring study blocks is taking big ideas and making them smaller so that things just become easy and manageable. So for my first study block, which is the one we're going to structure, I'm going to be in the library for 2 hours working on a blog post and reading an article. So again, if these are two easy assignments and you can just do one and then do the other, there is nothing wrong with that. For me, I know that in particular, the government reading is something that I tend to have trouble focusing during. And the blog post, I tend to have a little bit of perfectionism with writing that makes me want to take longer and makes me want to procrastinate. So I've decided to break these two tasks down into as small and minute increments as possible. So I already mentioned how I broke down the blog post: brainstorm, outline, type, edit, post. Altogether, I think that'll take me an hour if I can stay on task. And then the reading, I've looked through it just visually to see how it's broken up. And it's broken into these different sections of 2 to 5 pages. So I'm treating each section as its own task to help break it down more. So for me, the way to approach these two tasks that I have a bit of anxiety and perfectionism around, the best way for me to work on them is to go back and forth between each task throughout the 2 hours. That way, I'm not going to get bored. I'm not going to have my attention waver. I'm going to be constantly switching tasks so that I can maintain focus. Now, again, this approach might not work for everyone, especially if you're someone who does better in a state of deep focus. For that, I might even recommend starting to do this process until you become incredibly engaged in one task. And that's when it's okay to throw your plan out the window. Once you've become engaged in a task, as long as it's a task that you need to prioritize and need to work on, it's okay to abandon your plan, because part of the reason for having a plan is to make sure you get done what you need to get done. So for me, my final study block from 10 to 12 looks like this. From 10 to 11, I'm hoping to start by reading 2 pages of the article, then jump to brainstorming ideas for the blog post, jump back to reading, jump to outlining, jump back to reading. And then 11 to 12, the same process, but I'm jumping back and forth between writing the blog post and editing it along with reading. So I've tried to figure out how long these should take me, and I've structured it in a way that for me will help me stay on task. And just by sitting down and planning this out, I've now turned this into a to-do list instead of just a big yawning block of time. Now, all I have to do is sit down and read 2 pages. And then when I've done that, I can cross this off my list, which will give me this positive endorphins of having accomplished something. And then I just have to move on to the next task. So that's really how this operates for me. Now it's a to-do list of just how I'm going to spend the next 2 hours. So we're going to move into some factors to consider when staying focused, which has been a big theme of even how I've discussed structuring these study blocks. And it's because as students, you have so much work that you're doing independently, and maintaining a strong level of focus constantly is difficult and challenging. So the 2 factors that can really help us stay on task are internal accountability and external accountability. Internal accountability is when you accomplish tasks to meet your own standards. That's when you do well on an assignment because you care about it, and you succeed because you're interested. So the accountability comes from within. Whereas external accountability, that comprises of outside checks and balances to keep you on task. And sometimes we need to create our own external accountability to help us stay focused during long periods of time. So what I'm going to be talking about next are a few ways that you can create your own external accountability in your space. So the 3 tools that I use most often to help provide external accountability, even when I'm just working on my own, are timers, pre-planned breaks, and apps and Chrome extensions. So starting with timers, the idea of a timer is that you're just setting an increment of time on your phone, on a microwave, on your computer that will go off either when you want to switch between tasks or mark the end of a study block. So the goal here is to have a guess for how long each individual task is, and then that timer will go off when you should be finished. So let's say we're talking about writing a blog post and it will take an hour. I can set a timer for an hour. Why is this helpful? It can be helpful for students who have a lot to do and can get so pulled into a specific task and it takes them so much longer that they don't move on to the next task, because that timer will let them know they should be completed with this task. And if they aren't, then they need to wrap it up and move on to the next task soon. This can also be really helpful for students who are bad procrastinators. So let's say you sit down with an article and you set a timer for 20 minutes and 20 minutes go by, the timer goes off and you've read one page. That's a reality check for you that you aren't working. So it's an external factor to remind you how much time has passed so that you can check in with yourself about whether you're doing what you need to do. So with timers, I would recommend setting a timer that won't shut off right away. So that way you have to actually turn it off. You can't just ignore it and keep doing what you're doing. And then I also would recommend setting it on a device located on the other side of the room. So if you're working on your computer and you set a timer on your computer and then you're procrastinating on your computer, it's very easy to X out of the timer and keep watching that YouTube video. But if you have a timer on your phone, which is on the other side of the room, and you are playing a game on your laptop, you're going to have to physically stand up to go shut off the timer, and that's going to help pull you out of your procrastination spiral. Pre-planned break activities. So this is the idea that you know you're going to need to take a break and you acknowledge you will be taking a break, but you decide beforehand what you'll be doing to take a break and how you will be doing this in a productive way. So I have here a picture of someone washing a mug, because cleaning the dishes is a good example of this kind of break. It's something that isn't working, but it's something that's not going to draw you in. So the idea is you choose an activity that you can pick up and put down easily and that isn't totally distracting. It's not watching a new Netflix series. It's not something that you get totally distracted by. And then you set it up before you start your study block. Knowing what your break is going to help you anticipate those moments when your attention lags and allow you to take a break in a way that's not going to totally destroy your productivity. And then apps and Chrome extensions. This is another great way to use an external factor to keep you on task. There are a lot of Chrome extensions and apps that will block the internet either on your phone or your computer. Forest is a very popular one for that. Flora, also Freedom is a good one. But these are apps that will keep you from engaging with devices that tend to take you off task. You can also just block specific websites that you use to procrastinate. So if you know there's one website, maybe it's YouTube, that you always go to, and that's the one, instead of blocking everything, you can just block that one that feels deeply unproductive. And then there are also a lot of apps and Chrome extensions that work as positive motivation as well. So you can use fun timers that help motivate you to do your work. I really like Tide, which has nature sounds and sets it to a timer so that you feel like you're working in a nice space. So related to that, I also want to talk about a few techniques for breaking your procrastination habits, which is an ongoing process and not something that happens easily, but I have a few tips that you can add to your toolkit to try out if you find yourself procrastinating a lot during your study blocks. So the first one, kind of related to what I was just talking about with blocking that number one website, identify your number one procrastination impulse and avoid doing just that one thing. So this is you admitting to yourself, I procrastinate, it happens, things don't always go as planned, but the one thing I really do that really ruins my whole day is playing this video game or watching Netflix. And if you can isolate that one number one procrastination activity and just stay away from that one, you'll instead find other ways to procrastinate naturally, but they might not be as interesting as that number one, and you might come back to your work more easily. Another suggestion, this is maybe the easiest one here, is when you have that impulse of, I don't want to do this work. Instead, I want to open this web page, or I want to look at my phone. Accept that impulse of not wanting to work, but instead of opening a web page or reaching for the phone, just take a moment and do nothing. Just look around. You can stop working, but look around the room. Just sit in yourself and do nothing for 30 seconds for a minute. So you're still stopping working. You're following that impulse to not work, but you're not following through with doing something else. So again, you're less likely to be distracted. One that's more of a long-term kind of research gathering experiment is keep a piece of paper near your workspace and write down every website or app or activity you use to procrastinate. And then each time you use one, put a check mark next to its name. So with this, you're kind of just tracking what you do. But if you write down YouTube, for example, the first time that you go to YouTube, every time you open it up, just put a check next to it. And I'm not telling you not to go there, just keeping track of it will be very informative. And maybe if you go and put a check mark next to it for the 10th time, it'll help you not go to that website. And then for the extremely committed, rate the addictiveness, of every app on your phone on a scale from 1 to 10. So this is just how difficult it is for you to step away from it. And then for every app that's rated 7 or more, delete it. This can be a more extreme step. I would recommend this, honestly, for finals time, or if you have a particularly busy week, because sometimes you don't need to stop using Instagram or TikTok forever. But if you know that it sucks you in, maybe just deleting it from your phone for a week that you have finals will help, keep you from that temptation. And then just as a final tip, you want to make sure to start each study block by planning out your study block. So the first time you sit down to do your study block, make sure you know which tasks you want to work on, as we've been talking about, but also make sure at the end of each study block, you schedule the next time you'll sit down to study. So if my last study block on Sunday, March 20th is ending at 6 p.m., the last thing I want to do at that study block is figure out when I'm going to sit down the next day and study for an extended period of time. And then let's say that's Monday from 2 to 4. Then Monday at 2 p.m., the first thing I'm going to do is this whole routine of assessing my tasks and figuring out what I want to do over those 2 hours. And it might take me about 10 minutes to sit down and go through this, but those 10 minutes are going to save me more time by helping me work productively throughout that block. So we're going to have time for questions in a minute, but I wanted to let you know about our next webinar, which will be Tuesday, April 5th at 4:30, and it's going to be on maintaining motivation. So how to stay inspired when your attention is beginning to lag. And now we have time for any questions. If you have questions, feel free to add them to the chat. If not, thank you so much for stopping by today, and I hope you have a great afternoon.